bridged the gap. Last year, what did you do? So they need to go up the atmosphere. Yeah. Just like us. Playing without a budget. Yeah, every year we work on this thing. And me too, you know. On our program that I want to hear from.
Down here? No, I'd like to be closer actually.
Having more regular source of money.
I would like to see.
Oh, my yeah, good.
Finally we got it.
Hey, they got it. Good. Let's find out. People never want to take the inside seats. So Janie was organized many assemblies. From here. I don't know where I can. And play church when we want to sit.
I'm on Capitol Hill, organizing the study group of Burma. Now I forget It's amazing, you know. At the end of the day, you really get.
That's the one that's new that you can do from the setup because they didn't have one in Washington before.
You do? Yeah.
First is probably language teacher.
Oh, yeah?
They make it easy. It says function things for CSIS. So if they're short on CSIS website, or did I
On the
not
other hand, I
check
have
my,
well, I guess
I'm
my
not gonna
colleagues
get
will just
things.
bear with the
CSIS thing.
basic nature of the comments.
No. Yeah, we have to. But we're pushing now. Bring on.
All right, well,
How are you?
right back.
Good to see you.
I think I'm going to sit down and go to this one on Northeastern India. Because I know these, I know skiing halls.
Yep.
Skiing halls. I don't know if I know Simon or
No, you do so much, Bob. You know, we are so far behind you.
You gave a presentation on maybe
Yeah.
I can only stay for an hour, I'm 40 pounds cheaper. So if you ever come back in now,
I am, that's what we were discussing.
no, my wife's grandmother got food tea.
None of that. I'm from Boston, adjacent district.
So she's very
I don't know why I always Peggy.
So very happy.
My own
I ended up with
and I probably didn't my mind on that.
Okay, sure. I'll be back. Okay, sure. And the format is fine.
Sure.
Yeah, oh yeah. No.
Thank you very much.
Haven't seen you around for ages. We keep glad said we're done.
Slack off.
Oh,
Krishna's still right opposite the cathedral.
my arena actually wants to say
My good friends here.
It has been, and I'm really, we've gotten a lot accomplished, but it has been hectic. Yeah.
The real challenge is how much we can. But I just want to make sure that all the scholars on the sample that can actually write people. We may have to adjust the topics to suit
Talking with I mean, he's not just working with Egypt, and I recognize that the proposals that I initially were much broader, much too narrow for our particular, my disciplinary bias. But now I'm like, okay, I get it. I see what we're doing here. But it's been
especially trying to get the different people working together. But the moment people I was on the field with them, they're saying, it's fantastic. They would have never met people.
right. It is. It's very,
I never get to meet the former finance and foreign minister of Nepal. It's a this meeting, right?
About 3-4 blocks from the area.
I've been twice to that Monday.
They were, so they
Hi. Oh, hi. Nice to see you.
On various occasions.
they had food, they had to get to
Oh, good, good.
but in terms
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Well, good afternoon. We'll get started. I expect we're going to have a few more people trickle in, but this being Washington, very few of us, including myself, are ever on time. But we won't penalize those of you who get A+ for being here on time today. I'm Bob Hathaway. I'm actually not even sure I'm sitting where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
I have to remind myself who I am. I'm Bob Hathaway. I direct the Asia program here at the Wilson Center, and we're delighted to have you here. We're particularly delighted to be working with Mattia and the East-West Center, who have put together this panel for us today, and so the Wilson Center is very much in your debt, Mattia, and just want to say we are delighted. We don't pay as much attention in this city to Nepal as we should, and so it's particularly gratifying to see you all have come out today so that we can at least spend an afternoon focusing on this small and tucked away but nonetheless important land and country in South Asia. Mattia, I will hand the microphone over to you, but again I just want to thank you for doing all the hard work to make this event possible today.
Thank you very much, Bob. I want to begin by thanking Bob and the Woodrow Wilson Center, the Asia program, for kindly co-sponsoring this. Bob and I, we've worked together before, and it's a great pleasure to work with Bob. And once again, thank you, Bob, for doing this. Let me begin with a few words about the East-West Center, very few words. And then I would say a little bit about the project that you're working on and set the context for this panel, and then introduce the speakers of the panel. And there are also other members of the Nepal study group whom I'll also introduce who are here and who may want to participate in the discussion. The East-West Center, like the Woodrow Wilson International Center, but we were established in 1960 by the U.S. Congress with the mandate to promote cooperation and understanding between the United States and the governments and peoples of Asia Pacific. And we do this through collaborative research, through education and training, seminars, and outreach activities. And we were always based in Honolulu, but 4 years ago we set up a program in Washington, Initially, it was just me, one person, and today we've grown to 16. That's 1,600% in 4 years. It's pretty good. But anyway, if anybody is interested, I can say further, but I'll just stop at that on the East-West Center. One of our major themes of East-West Center Washington is conflict reduction in Asia. So we work on both international conflicts as well as internal conflicts. And we have a rather large project on internal conflicts in the context of state building in Asia. Our first phase, which ran from 2001 to 2004, we looked at Tibet, Xinjiang in China, Aceh and Papua in Indonesia, and the Moro problem in southern Philippines. The second phase, which has just started, we are looking at southern Thailand, Burma, Nepal, northeastern India, and Sri Lanka. So these are sort of 10, and this project will run for the next 3 years. The first meeting we've had over the last 4 days, a rather intensive discussion. We brought together about 48 people from all these countries, as well as from the US and Europe. We had 4 fruitful days of meeting. And we thought, since we have so many experts from these different countries here, it would be good to bring some of them to a panel for them to share the expertise with you. So that's really the context for this. And today the panelists will address the topic of making sense of the multiple conflicts in Nepal. Is there a way forward? We have 3 speakers, and I'll introduce them. But before I do so, I just want to acknowledge the other members of the study group. We have Dhruva Kumar, who is sitting here. He's from Nepal. Krishna Hachetu, who is here, and also Lauren Lev, who is here. All 3 of them are members of the study group. The panelists today, we have on my right, we have Susan. The full bio is on your program, but I would just say Susan Hangen is Assistant Professor of Anthropology and International Studies at Ramapo College, New Jersey, and she has conducted extensive research in Nepal. And then to my left here is Prakash Chandra Lohani. He received his PhD in business from the University of California, Los Angeles. He's been in Nepali politics for the last 30 years. He's been the foreign minister and also finance minister. He's also been the lead negotiator in the peace building efforts. And to the far left is Mahendra Lavoti, who is a principal researcher for the study group. He's just got his PhD in 2002 from University of Pittsburgh, and he's published several articles and books, and he's also very conversant in the issues that we are discussing. So each one of them will speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll open up for discussion when I'll hand over the session to Bob, who will moderate the session. I do apologize, I have to leave 15 minutes early to go to the next public forum on Northeast India, but we'll just continue. So we're beginning with yes.
Thank you, friends. Thank you for asking me to be here to take part in this discussion. Nepal is a state in crisis. For the last 12 years, the country has been going through various phases of Maoist violence and terror and human rights violation by both sides involved in the conflict. Over 12,000 people have already been killed in this struggle, and many more have been forced to flee from their homes and farms in different parts of the country and spend their life as internal refugees in dismal conditions. Similarly, thousands of people have left the country to escape violence and find a living in India and the Middle East. During this period, public infrastructure and properties worth hundreds of millions of rupees have been damaged or destroyed by the rebels. The annual growth rate of domestic product, which was around 5% in the 1990s, has decelerated to half that figure during the last few years. Governmental investment in development have declined, while expenditure in security has shot up rapidly. Investments in the delivery of essential services in the countryside has decreased considerably. Private investment has been sluggish, and foreign investments have virtually dried up. While there is a lot of excitement in the world today about the new Asian Renaissance in the 21st century, led by China and India, Nepal, remaining between the 2 most dynamic Asian economies of the world, remains in a state of armed struggle, political instability, and uncertain about its future. Now, a review of Nepalese Maoist literature clearly reveals that they are inspired by classical Marxism, where the contradiction between the so-called base and superstructure provides the basis for an armed struggle. Even in a least developed country like Nepal, based on Leninist organization and Mao's strategy of guerrilla warfare, gradually evolving into a fighting force capable of surrounding the cities through control of the countryside before finally capturing power in a decisive battle. During the last 10 years or so, Nepali Maoists have pursued this strategy and have successfully dislodged the government from many areas of the countryside. While they have not been able to establish any permanent rebel base anywhere in the nation, their ability to control the rural population and raise resources through extortion, threat, violence, and terror has increased. We must note here that this trend has gained momentum partly because of the open border between Nepal and India, which makes it easy for the rebels to slip across the border when the going gets tough inside the country. Similarly, the support of the radical left groups with headquarters in the European countries has also been a source of encouragement to the Maoists. Internally, the performance of the parliamentary forces running the country has allowed the Maoists to claim that a parliamentary democratic system cannot bridge the gap between its institutional form and its delivery content to the people. In 1991, when democracy was restored in the country, people had high expectations. The general thinking was that since democracy has now been restored, the country will take a new and a radical course in the transformation of the socio-economic system that has remained over the ages unjust and unfair to the downtrodden and the poor. While some progress was made in liberalizing the economy and assuring freedom of expression, the general atmosphere of power struggle and infighting in the parliament was not helpful in sustaining the credibility of the political parties and their leaders. There were 10 governments in 10 years, and the attitude of grabbing power at any cost without any concern for the moral and ethical implications of political decisions created bewilderment and a sense of being let down by leaders who were given the trust to lead the nation. It seems in retrospect that we wholeheartedly accept parliamentary institutional form without necessarily becoming aware of the norms and values that are essential for its success. A hard-boiled approach to politics that adhered to the famous dictum that everything is justified in love, politics, and war provided the basis for corruption, cronyism, and an arrogance of power, but not for social equality and progress, for promoting equality of opportunity for the disadvantaged groups in different parts of the country. Nepal's ancient regime and the values that sustained it remained relatively intact even after the restoration of democracy. The normative conditions for stability that are essential in a parliamentary system were generally ignored, and we should not hesitate to accept the fact that almost all the parties represented in the parliament were involved in this unwholesome process. It has proved to be a costly mistake, for it helped the Maoists to plead their case to the people while eroding enormously the political capital of the parliamentary parties that was created during the time of the restoration of democracy in 1991. The net result has been the present derailment of the constitutional process in the nation. Where do we go from here? This is the question troubling the nation today, especially in the context of the King's controversial decision, both at the constitution and political plane, to rule the country for 3 years for holding the elections to the national parliament. To respond to this issue, we have to start with the fact that there are 3 political forces in the country today, and they are the King, the political parties, and the Maoists with their ideology and the guns. Perhaps a 4th force should also be mentioned here, and it is represented by the international community consisting primarily of USA, India, Europe, China, and Japan. Generally, it is our impression that the concern of the West for democracy is normally genuine, unless some other concerns of national interest are involved. I will not elaborate more on this point. Logically, in a parliamentary system with the concept of king in parliament, the monarch should be considered as a part of the parliament. The functioning of the system requires that there exists a certain level of trust and confidence between the king and the political parties. Once this is achieved, the unifying strength of a traditional institution like constitutional monarchy can then complement the dynamics of party politics within the framework of checks and balances provided in the constitution. It is this condition that is missing in Nepal at the present, all to the advantage of the Maoists, who have shown their tactical flexibility when they announced that they would accept a multi-party framework in the future. To understand this move, one only needs to remember that there is multi-party politics even in North Korea with 3 parties: the Korean Workers' Party, the Social Democratic Party, and the Chondu Party. Monarchy has the potential to play a positive role in providing stability while institutionalizing democracy in the country. The country at present lacks functional politics. The credibility of the politician is also facing a crisis. Similarly, monarchy is also under controversy for its decisions. In fact, most institutions in the country that were considered as being vital for a successful democratic transition are facing a credibility crisis. In view of this reality, dismantling the concept of constitutional monarchy, as suggested in some quarter, is going to generate a power vacuum and a possible upheaval whose consequences are difficult to contemplate at the moment. A small country sandwiched between two great rising powers of this world has to be extra careful to make sure that it does not slide into anarchy because of a power vacuum in politics and governance. This is a perspective that we should always keep in mind as we design and define our political positions. On the other hand, our commitment to the supremacy of the people in establishing the legitimacy of the government must be maintained with firmness and determination. Thus, the legitimacy of the government has to be based on the consent of the people expressed through periodic election. But if the king and the political parties continue to drift apart, as it is happening at the present, the chances of Maoists coming to dialogue with the government remains weak, irrespective of the internal struggle that they are going through at the moment. A resolution of the current state of tension and mistrust between the king and the political parties must then be seen as a necessary condition for starting dialogue with the Maoists and bringing the constitutional process back in its track. To achieve this goal, while the political parties need to tone down their shrill rhetoric against the king should also give up the direct rule of the country and decide on a new governance format in consultation with the parliamentary parties of the country in line with the logic of the constitution. The past 7 months of direct rule by the king has clearly shown that there is an inherent contradiction between the concept of constitutional monarchy and the direct rule by the king. A constitutional monarchy is above criticism and beyond the fire and fury of party politics. But what happens to this logic when the king is the direct ruler? Given the present reality, how can other constitutional organs of the system, like the Supreme Court, make the distinction between the constitutional monarch, who is beyond criticism, and the head of the cabinet, who must be reprimanded by the court and his decisions overturned, or who can be reprimanded by the court and his decisions overturned? Basically, how does one protect the dignity of the constitutional monarchy when there is the direct rule of the king? Invariably, a situation like this is bound to be challenged sooner or rather than later, leading to tension and struggle between the king and the political parties, all to the advantage of the Maoists, aptly expressed in a Nepali saying, which says, "Brothers fight and the third party takes away everything." For a small country that lies between the two great nations of the world, it is essential for both the king and the agitating political parties to see the logic behind this aphorism and make the necessary move to reach an understanding in line with the logic of the constitution. I have one, I think it will take about 2 minutes. Democracy was restored in 1990. Now we know that it is not enough. The task in the future is to reinvent democracy so that the sovereign will of the people, that is the basis of legitimacy of a government, remains more than a veil to hide the predatory character of the state and those who preside over its functioning. The political economy of this transformation is not going to be easy, but I think we could suggest the following. First, understanding between the king and the political parties for a new governance format in line with the constitution of the nation and the supremacy of the people. Second, agreement among parliamentary forces on a set of measures to transform the political economy of the country, and this calls for a radical change between the sharing of power between different organs of the state, both at the central and local level, so as to assure democratic inclusion and empowerment of the downtrodden and the poor. This will include specific measures like changes in the electoral system in the form of proportional representation system, affirmative action based on human development index for each ethnic groups, restructuring of the state so that local level institutions have greater autonomy guaranteed by the constitution in resource mobilization, resource utilization, decision making, and in various areas of local governance like health, education, and so on. So far, there has been only superficial discussion on these issues of democratic inclusion and empowerment. In any future program of action, these issues must assume a central position. Based on this, then, negotiation with the Maoists based on a unified position, among the constitutional forces. When we were in the government, in fact, we were in the government about 2 years ago. When we were in the government 2 years ago, we did present a radical blueprint in our negotiation with the Maoists on the issues outlined above. We have since then developed a complete program of action in this area and have published it for discussion. We failed in the past because the Maoists were aware of the division in the parliamentary camp and so decided to walk away from the meeting. If this is not to be repeated in the future, it is our view that the monarchy and the political parties have to respect the logic of the constitution. It would mean, first of all, an willingness on the part of His Majesty the King to seriously consider ending his experiment of direct rule in favor of a coalition with political parties. Nepal is facing the need for what could be called as core transformation, not peripheral transformation, but core transformation in power relationship among different ethnic groups and communities, so that the country makes good on its promises of substantive equality as opposed to formal equality. That has been the hallmark of parliamentary system based on a majoritarian concept of governance. Constitutional monarchy has an opportunity to play a historical role in this process if it allows and encourages moving this process forward in collaboration with political parties under a democratic system where the supremacy of the people is the accepted basis of governance. Once this process starts, the no deal with you kind of alternative that the Maoists are pursuing at the moment will lose its relevance and charm, encouraging them to go for a honorable settlement through dialogue. The King political party alliance, based on a set of core transformational program, is bound to change the trade-off between continued violence and an option of peaceful settlement facing the Maoists. Under these conditions, there will be greater probability of formal political positions giving way to a process of defining common interests as well as differences, so as to arrive at a solution that each party can present to the people as a gain to the nation. It is my view that this is both a historic opportunity as well as a challenge. To save the country from falling any further into the abyss of destruction, disaster, it is not necessary that we like or love each other, but we must find a way to work with each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll come back for questions. Mahendra? You can take 10 minutes.
Sure. I'll try to bridge the two, the first and the third discussions. The Maoist insurgency that has raised since 1996 has caught the attention of the world. Different international organizations and states have shown an interest in mediating the conflict. However, largely non-violent, but once in a while violent, nationalist, ethnic, caste, and regional conflicts, which have exploded after the restoration of democracy in terms of identity politics, also pose a grave threat to state building in Nepal. Thirdly, conflict among constitutional forces between political parties and between the king and political parties has also undermined the democratic politics in Nepal. Because to some extent all the conflicts are related, attempts to address one conflict in isolation is not likely to succeed. Here it should be pointed out that Nepal's political history indicates that perhaps Nepali soil is fertile for violent conflict. All the three largest people-based political forces have expanded after being involved in violence. The Maoists were a small extremist leftist party prior to launching the insurgency in 1996. Now they have varying degree of influence almost all over Nepal, whether by popular support or coercive submission of people. The Communist Party of Nepal, United Marxist-Leninists, either the largest or the major opposition party during the democratic epoch in 1990s, outdid other splinter communist factions in growth after it initiated its own violent movement in the 60s. Even though the violent movement was repressed, CFN ML at the time attracted a host of youth communist cadres and leaders to emerge as the largest communist party after 1999. The largest political party, the Nepali Congress, also engaged in violent revolution during the 1940s, attracting a large following to outbid other older illustrious political parties like Nepal Praja Parishad. What this historical incursion indicates is perhaps, whatever the reasons, Nepali are attracted to violence. It could be that engagement in violence is perceived by the people and political cadres as commitment to broader political transformation. Whatever the reasons, Nepal's political history shows attraction toward violence among the people. The Maoist and nationalist conflict became prominent during the democratic years. What were the reasons for the conflict? Both underlying structural conflicts, causes, and proximate causes exist. Extreme inequality between the center and rural regions, rich and poor, different ethnic, caste, national groups, and men and women has been cited for the escalation of conflict. inequality by itself is not sufficient for violent conflicts. If it were, then Nepal would have witnessed violent conflicts long time ago. However, the democratic period provided space for people to articulate inequalities and frustrations and to mobilize against them. Increased awareness of inequalities has led to the emergence, support, and growth of violent conflict. While structural inequalities created fertile grounds for the conflict, the lack of sincere attempts to solve the conflict by the political parties and leaders aggravated the conflict. At present, the royal government seems reluctant to initiate peace talks, largely because it wrongly perceives that it can crush the insurgency. Along with previous governments, it has failed to address the underlying causes of conflict to undermine the basis for conflict. As of now, the monarchy and the mainstream political parties have failed to recognize the gravity of nationalistic conflict because it has not become as violent as the Maoist insurgency. The way out of the present conflict is that different factors, both underlying and proximate causes, should be addressed. Nepal's democratic experience also informs what may or may not work. In sectors during the democratic years where power was dispersed among many actors, the areas performed well, such as media, civil society sector, local government, to the extent it had power. On the other hand, democracy did not work where power was concentrated in some institutions, whereas other institutions were made powerless. The unchecked power abused by the executive and the ineffectiveness of the parliament are some example. The former having too much power, the latter being more or less powerless. So in this context, what can be done to resolve the conflict? At the structural level, the underlying reasons for political, economic, and cultural inequality should be addressed. It could mean from land reforms to extensive devolution. In 1990, the power of the king was taken away, but mostly kept at the center within the executive. Further reforms should empower the regional and local governments through federalism and devolution. Cultural discrimination should be eliminated, and policies and laws to address inequality due to informal institutions like tradition, custom, etc. should be formulated. The army should be brought under civilian control, but mechanisms should be developed that prevent politicization of the army along partisan lines, like the police and bureaucracy was done during the 1990s. Similarly, the state mechanism should be reformed to make the police and bureaucracy more professional and independent of the ruling party to provide politicization. Political parties should be democratized so that top leaders do not govern them based on nepotism and loyalty alone. Term limits elections of candidates for different positions, different party election to different party organizations, etc. should be necessary. The 1990s also saw weak accountability mechanism. Whoever and whichever sector had the power went unchecked. Thus, despite the overwhelming development of the media and NGO sector, power abuses within this sector went unchecked, leading to popular dissatisfaction. Horizontal accountability mechanism to check power in between elections should be promoted to hold public office accountable. In Nepal, the notion is that once you get elected, you can do whatever you want, and that no one should hold you responsible exist. For it, central constitutional agencies like the Election Commission, Anti-Corruption Agency, the Parliament, the judiciary should be made autonomous to enable the various institutions to check each other and the executive. In the post-1990 period, since the executive had a very influential role in nomination and funding of the most central agencies like the Election Commission, anti-corruption agencies, they could not check the power abuse of the executive because they were under the influence of the executive. Similarly, the judiciary should be reformed so that it does not become the tool of the elite caste groups. In post-1990 period, the judiciary interpreted the constitution in citizen realms, local government medium of language, public service exam policy, gender equality issues that hurt the different linguistic groups, Madhisi and women's. The power-sharing mechanisms would also address the instability problem Nepal witnessed. Since whoever controlled the executive enjoyed most power, the oppositions were forced to go to the street to influence public policies. and they went, or they went to unethical means to unseat the government so they could become, they control the executive. The government, on the other hand, went to any length to keep the power, including influencing elections, which is amply illustrated by the 2 local elections where the party that controlled the government overwhelmingly won both the elections. If different political parties enjoy real power in different institutions at the center as well as local and regional government, the need to capture power at the center at any cost would be less necessary. And perhaps it could give also some space to the Maoists if they control some regional governments and so forth. What the above suggestions say is that in the current conflict, going back to pre-2002 period is not sufficient. The polity has to be further reformed with participatory mechanism that includes all political forces and socio-cultural groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mahendra. Susan?
Okay. I'm going to address the ethnic dimension of Nepal's current political crisis. And there's been relatively little international attention paid to this particular set of issues. However, I believe that it's a key part of the picture, and that without addressing ethnic inequality and grievances, no long-term political stability will be achieved in Nepal. First of all, I'll have to lay out the ethnic composition of Nepal for those of you who are unfamiliar with it. Nepal's population is extremely diverse, and no single majority group exists there. There are caste Hindus, who include both high and low caste Hindus, and they are further divided between those in the hills and those from the plains, Nepal's Tarai belt. Those from the plains, along with other people who live in the plains, are known as the Madhesi. In addition to these groups, we have 61 ethnic groups who identify themselves as Nepal's indigenous nationalities, or Janjati. Many of these groups have their own languages, religions, and cultures, and they include some well-known groups such as the Sherpas, Gurungs, Rais, and Limbus. What are the grievances of all of the minority or excluded groups in Nepal? They see the high caste Hindus in Nepal as having dominated the state since its inception in the late 18th century. Every level of the state, from the peon in the government office in the rural areas up through school teachers in government schools and members of parliaments, is dominated by high caste Hindus. So people from these other groups feel excluded. They feel they are not part of the state. I'm going to focus here in particular on the demands and grievances of the ethnic portion of Nepal's population. In particular, they reject the definition of the Nepali nation as a Hindu nation. The state has long defined Nepal as a Hindu nation. It's united by the Hindu religion, the Hindu monarchy, and the Nepali language. Ethnic groups in Nepal seek to redefine that definition so that it includes them and acknowledges the multicultural nature of Nepal's population. I think it's important to emphasize that Nepal's ethnic groups do not want to secede from the state. They very much see themselves as Nepali. They just want to expand the definition and to have greater acknowledgement of their participation in the state and have greater avenues for participation in the state. So what are the specific demands of these ethnic groups? In addition to remaking the definition of the state, they want the state to support multiple languages, their local ethnic languages, and not just the Nepali language. They want Nepal to become a secular rather than a Hindu state, and if within that secular state, the state should support Hinduism and allow for Hindu holidays, they should equally acknowledge Buddhist and other religious holidays. Like many forces in Nepal, they argue that the state should be restructured. There should be a federal system of states where ethnic groups have greater participation in the government and which support ethnic cultures and languages. And they want reservations for marginalized groups so that there are more opportunities for ethnic groups to participate in the institutions of the state. They also believe that the Hindu monarchy acts as a buttress of high caste Hindu dominance, and believe that Nepal should no longer have a monarch, but rather should become a republican system. So to achieve these things, they want to have a new constitution. Okay, so how are the ethnic political demands voiced? There are a number of organizations that have become very active, particularly since 1990. The most prominent players in this ethnic political movement are civil society organizations that represent particular ethnic groups. And they're involved in cultural revitalization movements, promotion of ethnic languages and cultures. The most dominant voice in the movement is a conglomeration or cluster of these civil society organizations known as the Nepal Adivasi Janjati Mahasangh. And this is an umbrella organization of all of these different civil society organizations, and it's acted fairly effectively as a pressure group to try to get some concessions from the government meeting their demands. In a couple of particular ways in which it's been successful, the organization was able to pressure the government into offering news broadcasts in ethnic languages. And the government also recently established a national foundation for the development of indigenous nationalities. That happened in 2002. So now the government is at least officially addressing ethnic concerns, and that was a direct result of this Mahasangh. However, there are some limitations to these organizations. It's often the Mahasangh and other organizations are not well grounded in rural Nepal. It's primarily an urban phenomenon. And furthermore, they haven't really been able to address the fact that Janjatis, or ethnic minorities, are excluded from the formal political system. Ethnic political parties are another way in which ethnic groups have tried to make their demands. These parties, however, were banned in the 1990 Constitution. Despite that, they operated in several rural areas of the country and gained popular support. And in particular, these organizations work to raise awareness about ethnic inequality. However, they gained a few votes, and no members of parliament were elected from these parties. Okay, so what are the links between this ethnic political movement and the current conflict that we see in Nepal? First of all, as Mahendra alluded to, there are a lot of Janjati groups who are actively participating in the Maoist movement. Many of the rank-and-file supporters of the Maoists are from these ethnic communities. The Maoists also include some of these demands for ethnic equality in their overall package of demands. This is not their primary focus. And they also demand the same kind of restructuring of the state that the ethnic groups have demanded. We also see now that the mainstream political parties, especially after February 1st, 2005, support many of the same ideas about needing to restructure the state. So despite what we might see as an apparent consensus emerging between ethnic political leaders, the mainstream political parties, and the Maoists, in fact, I think that is overly optimistic. There are still, within the leadership of the Maoists and the mainstream political parties, really no leaders who are from these ethnic communities. And furthermore, we have no elected representatives from ethnic communities who support and advocate ethnic rights. Thus, it's not inevitable that specific ethnic grievances would be addressed even if the parties and Maoists are able to build an alliance and to work towards getting a new constituent assembly and restructuring the state. So my main point of concern is that in any efforts to restructure, rebuild Nepal, it's imperative to find a way to include the voices of Nepal's ethnic leaders, or else we will, I believe, quickly have another political crisis on our hands very quickly after. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. I think all the three panelists have quite nicely highlighted the complexity and the multiplicity of conflicts in Nepal and how they interconnect and what are the issues to be addressed. At this point, I'll hand over to Bob to take over. Bob.
Thanks. It's falling apart. Thanks, Taya. Thanks to all three of our extremely well-informed presenters today. Let me open it to you. I would ask you to identify yourself. We will pass a microphone to you if you'll wait till the mic comes. I would ask you to identify yourself and to keep your comments and or questions brief. We'll start over here. Wait till Michael brings you.
I'm Krishna Chetu, student of political science. Basically, I want to enter the core issues about the proposition of reconciliation between monarchy and political parties. My sense and my questions is this: how far this proposition is reflective to the current discourse and dominant debate in Nepal, and also in future scenario. These questions and this point is putting here in consideration to 4 factors, historical factors. In the half centuries from the 1950s, when Nepal entered into new course, Nepal has experience of 4 kings, Tribhuvan, Mahendra, Birendra, and Gyanendra. It is not only the Gyanendra, the present kings, the proposal of constitutional monarchy in different form. Take the example of 1951. In 1951, people gave a position of king in council of minister. In 1959, constitution gave a king's role of sovereign king with parliament. 1999 constitution gave a status of constitutional monarchy. It is not only this Gyanendra. From Tribhuvan to Gyanendra, all the 4 kings from 1951 onwards, right now, they rejected the position of constitutional monarchy by action and by words. So how far the kings, the monarchy, not only the king, how far this proposition is relevant, judging the current history of Nepal, number 1 proposition. Number 2, recently political parties have taken a formal position different from the constitutional monarchy. Nepali Congress, which is the main dominant political parties from the 1950s onwards, these parties has deleted the words of constitutional monarchy from its formal constitution. By taking this formal position, Nepali Congress is giving a message and try to convince the people and try to mobilize the people that parties, when it was formed, it adopted the position of constitutional monarchy has changed. Now it is open for Republican. And the another major dominant party, UML, that parties have clearly declared that the objective of present resurgence democratic movement is Republican democracy. This is the second factor. The third factor is there is a constant informal talk and rapport building is going on between the Maoist parties and the mainstream political parties. And there are now, their rapport is developing to the extent of having a formal negotiation. So, and what could be a formal, consensus points between the Maoist and the mainstream parties is that Maoist has changed. It may be tactical and it may be commitment. Maoist parties has in latest position while giving the proposition of new model of democracy said that multi-party competitive system, not multi-party cooperative system like the China and the North Korea. Categorically, they use the multi-party competitive system. What they want from the political parties in reciprocate is that they have a Republican agenda. That is so. This is the third factor. The fourth factor.
Let me interrupt you, if I may.
Just last point.
We want to give other people a chance.
Half minute.
12 seconds.
Okay. An international disapproval to the royal takeover or royal executive position. Given these all 4 factors suggest that the country is heading toward a different direction from the proposition of the possibility of reconciliation between the monarchy and the mainstream party. Whether the speakers, it is speakers.
Well, we'll see if anyone would like to take up any of those issues. Any wish to take up any of those issues?
You want to take it immediately or hear others? And then
There's a number of items on the table right now. If anyone would like to comment now, let's see.
Well, I think, Mr. Adesha talked about constitutional monarchy in the Nepali Congress, saying that the deleting the word constitutional monarchy. They have deleted the word, but they haven't also said that they are against constitutional monarchy. In fact, they have left the field open for negotiations with constitutional monarchy. That's a very important point. They have said that, look, we are reviewing our position, now we are willing to talk with you. I mean, that's the message that they are conveying, in fact. They haven't said that they are against constitutional monarchy. Now, on this rapport between the Maoists and the political parties, let's look at the strategic aims of both. What is the strategic aim of the Maoist? The Maoist strategic aim, if you look at their documents, if you look at the reports, if you look at the theoretical positions, it is the establishment of a communist state. It is the establishment of a Maoist state. I mean, they have only said that, well, for tactical purpose, we may change for a while, but this ultimately our objective is establishment of the Maoist state. They haven't changed at all, in fact. So the strategic objective of a parliamentary party, of a system, of a party that believes in a parliamentary system, and the strategic objective of a Maoist party, the political paradigm itself is quite different, and the possibility of convergence. I have never seen a Maoist party converging with a parliamentary party and going into a parliamentary system. So I don't see that as a possibility. The convergence, as I see it, is between the king and the political parties, because the king has said he wants to be a constitutional monarch. Surely, at the moment he is not. At the moment he is directly ruling the country, and as I have also said, this is something that he should not be doing. That he should decide in a new governance format in collaboration with the political parties. But their strategic objective is the same, in the sense that both are for a multi-party political system. And a constitutional monarchy is safe only in a multi-party political system. So their strategic interests are the same. And when your strategic interests are the same, the chances of collaborations are also better. That's why we are suggesting that for a democratic Nepal, the collaboration between these two elements are essential. The third fact, and I'll stop, I know.
I was just saying if either one of our other panelists wish to add, go ahead. Go ahead and make the.
The third fact
point.
is look at the present reality. The present reality is you have the king. You have the king. He does have a traditional legitimacy. It's an institution for 250 years. He has the support of the army, 100,000 man army. So he's a force. And in politics, you don't just wish away things. You have to work under the given reality. I'm pretty sure that some of you may not like what the president is doing, but he has been elected for 4 years, and you have to operate within certain norms and parameters. What I am saying is, so the political parties are a force, the Maoists are a force, and the king is also a force. Now, if we want a democratic transition in Nepal without a power vacuum, and a power vacuum is very dangerous in a country like ours when you are sandwiched between two very powerful neighbors. When you have a power vacuum, you have anarchy. The country can disintegrate. So if we want to avoid that situation, the logical and the rational course of action is to see where there are common interests. Surely there may be differences, but even if you define the differences, then work out the differences so that you create more value for the nation. This is the strategy that should be taken.
Thank you. Dr. Lawati?
I think in political process and negotiations, we should be careful while analyzing the facts that what the positions and interests of the groups are. Any political parties, any political forces may say one thing at public facade, but their interest may be something else. So, one, there is question in terms of taking things at face value. Two, even if we take things at face value, suppose the Maoist and political parties come together, join forces for a Republican setup. What that means is if they really want a Republican setup, then there will be conflict between the king, monarch, backed by the army, and these forces. So there will be further violent conflict in another sector. I think that's, if that were so, it supports my thesis that Nepal is ripe for violent conflict. Thank you.
I want to, and the panelists, please, and we've had discussion, so I really want to open it up to the public who are here. I mean, they've come, and I want to give the time to them to raise questions and get the panelists to respond. So, Bob, please.
I wanted to follow up on that discussion.
Amit, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Amit Pandya with Management Systems International. I wanted to sort of follow up a little bit on the discussion we just heard and sort of ask a question which may be a rhetorical question, but whatever the sort of the theoretical and formal merits of a constitutional monarchy, I wonder to what extent this monarch is in fact capable of sustaining a constitutional monarchy in any way that guarantees the kind of political stability that would prevent that vacuum. I mean, I agree, a vacuum would be very dangerous. And I guess the question has several dimensions. I mean, one is, it's probably not a coincidence that the current phase of the political crisis seems to begin at about the same time as the tragic events that brought this monarch into the monarchy. There are questions of his political temperament, and there are questions of his legitimacy. And I wonder what all that adds up to when it comes to sort of creating any kind of viable constitutional monarchy under current circumstances.
I mean, if, with your permission, I'm actually going to expand that question just a little bit, because I think most people would concede that the political system didn't work very effectively under the previous monarch either. So I think Amit's question about this monarch is very much on point. But I think beyond that, are there questions about the viability of constitutional monarchy for Nepal at all? Who'd like to deal with Amit's question or my slightly different question?
You want me to respond?
If you'd care to.
Mm-hmm. All right. See, as far as the previous monarch was concerned, King Birendra, in fact, he was one person who really helped in the reintroduction of restoration of parliamentary system in the country. Of course, the political parties put the pressure, and he responded. Because I was very much involved during those days, and I know that his whole position was, instead of negotiating with a third party, with a foreign country that had promised him help, in fact, in some ways, indirectly, if he met certain conditions. So instead of negotiating with or trying to establish my position with the help of another country or some other forces, I will negotiate with my own people and give them the authority. So, in fact, the role of the previous monarch was exemplary, and it will be remembered in Nepal's history as one of the bright moments in his career, in fact. And for 10 years, he was a constitutional monarch, in word and spirit. He was a constitutional monarch. The political parties had they were operating as per the constitution. But then you see, as I think Matthias was saying in the morning, you have a formal constitutional setup. I mean, our constitution has all the good things. We have collected all the good things of all the constitutions, and we have a good constitution. But to make it operational, the values and the norms that are relevant to operate that constitution, that's very important. And sometimes the informal dealings, if you go against those values and norms, then no matter how good a constitution you have, in actual practice, the constitution becomes inoperable. In actual practice, it becomes dysfunctional. So during the last 10 years, in 10 years, we had 10 governments. Somehow, the constitutional, the spirit of the constitution in terms of certain, the skill of arriving at a consensus, in terms of not seeing the government as a winner-take-all, framework. I don't think these values, we were able to develop the really consensual values over time. And that led to the erosion of the parliament, erosion of the political parties, erosion of their goodwill among the people, erosion of the credibility of the politicians among the people. And it created a situation where the king is playing the role that he's playing now. Now the thing is to get back again in the track, and that means, again, the king and the political parties, like in 1990, they will have to come to an understanding where, on the principle that the people are supreme, on the principle that sovereignty resides on the people, and on the principle that the parties represent the people. On this principle, they will have to work together, and then deal with the Maoists from a position of ideological strength, and that's crucial. This is not happening at the moment. That's where the problem is happening.
I wonder if either of the other panelists want to deal more directly with Amit's question.
We will not be that.
Excuse me, sir. Yes.
In terms of to make the current monarch a constitutional monarch, that is a challenge. That could be a challenge. But provided he becomes a constitutional monarch, my thesis is it could contribute to consolidation of democracy. The reason is, if a truly constitutional monarch, Nepal has a truly constitutional monarch, that monarch will have only symbolic power. However, if we don't have a monarch, then the symbolic power of the head of state and the real power of the head of the executive goes into an individual, then the challenge becomes that individual could turn into an elected despotism, as we have seen in many Latin American countries. So provided, I'm not saying it's easy, provided the current king chooses to become a constitutional monarchy, it could contribute towards consolidation of democracy. And the other issue is, suppose we should not forget that even if Nepal turns into a republican setup, the challenge then becomes that would the army not intervene when conservative forces see that law and order situation is floundering? So we should look at the underlying reasons and causes, and that could lead to the consolidation of the democracy and so on.
There was one question on this.
Let me ask Professor Engen if she'd like to get in first. Did you have? Yeah.
I'll just be very brief. I think it will be next to impossible for the monarch to regain the trust of the people in the ethnic political movement that I worked with and studied. I think that they already in 1990 did not want the king to have the power that he had, and I think they see the moves of 2004 and 2005 as breaching that trust. And it can happen, but I think it will further exacerbate ethnic tensions within Nepal. And some people say the king is seen as ethnically neutral, but I don't think that that's true from the perspective of the ethnic populations.
Dr. Lahani, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, there was a question about, I think the gentleman there asked, will the present king, does he have the capability of really providing the kind of leadership or providing the kind of focus that's needed in the country? And I think here it's not a question of course the individuals count. In any process of rapid social transition, if the institutions that are there, if they have to prove that they are going to function, and it applies to your country, it applies to us. And what is an institutional decay? When an institution decays, when it is not able to, prove that it is functional to society's aspirations and society's goals as it evolves over time. So I think that applies to political parties. That applies to constitutional monarchy. That applies to all institutions. So we'll just have to see.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Here. We'll wait for the microphone. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. We spent quite a bit of time discussing...
Let me ask you to introduce yourself.
Oh, pardon me. My name is Janie Cole. I'm a former American diplomat who served in Nepal. I was there when the Constitution was promulgated, in fact. And I'm also an East-West Center alumna. We spent quite a bit of time talking about the palace, and that's certainly important and interesting. But I really thought that Professor Hengen's material was new and interesting to me. And I guess I thought that the Maoists were largely an ethnic movement. And perhaps this is much more subtle. I mean, how do you see the various indigenous clans and tribes involved with this Maoist movement or not?
Thank you. I think this is an important distinction to make. I mean, the Maoists are not primarily an ethnic insurgency; it's a class-based insurgency, right? They see themselves as working for the class-oppressed masses primarily, but they also address gender and ethnic inequality within the overall package of social reforms that they claim they will bring about. But I think that the fact that they have in fact paid attention to ethnic grievances, ethnic inequalities, and the fact that so many people from ethnic minority groups support the Maoists is in some ways a result of the fact that there has been this very strong ethnic political movement in Nepal from 1990 onwards.
Over here, Michael.
Hans Raudenbilder. In previous incarnations, I was at times a constitutional lawyer and at times country director for Nepal or for the World Bank. I'd like to take issue with one contention, namely that Nepal's 1990 constitution was a good constitution and that it's all a problem of morals and values and so on. I think any constitutional scholar looking at Nepal's constitution, its constitutional history, would have to say that this was not a constitutional monarchy, certainly not by the standards by which this is today understood as a technical term, both in the drafting of the constitution and the way it was applied. There were basic flaws with the concept of the constitutional monarch. And it was not a problem of drafting. This was not because these were bad lawyers, but this was because it was the result of a fairly lame and difficult political compromise. And basically the compromise did not work. So I think the arguments being made today by many parties about the value of the Constitution and the return to the Constitution are pretty futile and will lead to a dead end. I think what Nepal needs is a new constitutional deal in whatever form and process that will take. Thank you.
I didn't hear a question, but I would invite any of our panelists if they would care to respond.
I won't respond, but I'll add to something what he said about the Constitution and my argument for a new Constitution and so forth. The 1990 Constitution were promoted by its writers as the best Constitution in the world. But for me, I have been arguing that it is not so. One of the reasons, a few reasons, but one of the reasons, it has a majoritarian political institutions which do not work in multicultural societies, like in Switzerland, Belgium, and so forth, where there is more power-sharing mechanism and institutions, one. Two, there are many discriminatory articles in the Constitution. One, for instance, in terms of citizenship. A child cannot get a Nepali citizen based on mother's lineage in Nepal. The child has to have a Nepali father. He or she cannot get a citizenship from mother's lineage. So that's a discriminatory article. The next thing, in Nepal, ethnic political parties are banned. The constitution banned. So if that were to be applicable, many Christian democratic parties in Europe, in Nepal, would be banned. So, I mean, I'm just giving examples. There are many contradictory, discriminatory articles in the 1990 Constitution, and which has to be abrogated and taken into a new, more egalitarian Constitution and so forth. Thank you.
Did I see another hand on this side? All right, let's go to the very back, Michael.
He's raising hand from the very
Thank you.
beginning.
My name is Rupendra. I'm a student of economics. My question is, we're looking at the way forward, and frequently when I go to discussions like this, what we hear is modifications and sometimes even big changes in the political architecture itself. But are these changes going to be enough to engender a sort of way forward that we're looking at, as in a change of political hierarchy and architecture in itself? Is that going to be enough? Do we at this point need to talk about sector-based policies, policies such as education policies, health policies, issues that are actually affecting people? I beg to differ, but my opinion is that political freedom sounds sweeter on a full stomach. Are we going to somehow, is it time, and how we are going to work on policy-based bureaucratic improvements? Thank you.
Is that addressed to any particular person or anyone who wants to answer?
Anyone who wants to answer would be good.
Anyone have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think, the questions in Nepal today are political. In fact, the question of sharing, power sharing, the question of the participation of the ethnic minorities, the question of restructuring of the state. And so you cannot avoid these issues, and I think we have to meet these issues head on. On the other hand, it doesn't mean that education, health, etc., it needs to be neglected, or we should not discuss about these things. But a political framework, when there is a demand for a new political framework, or changes or radical change in the existing one, and when the whole movement of the political focus is on that issue, I think we should not hesitate to address these issues and discuss these issues.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
I'll just add that the points he raised are important. In Nepal, generally the attitude is if you introduce one particular policy, in this case perhaps restructuring the state, that could be sufficient. I think the urge should be to continuously address different issues and problems at the same time. Perhaps we should be focused on restructuring the state, but at the same time not forget that there is a need for some economic policies, social policies that are necessary, and so on. Thank you.
Here and then here.
Hi, my name is Seth Munshine. I'm a graduate student of International Affairs, and thank you for speaking today. It's been enlightening. I have a question mainly for Mr. Lahani, but anybody can answer. A slightly different point of view. I'm curious, what can the U.S. government do in its policies towards Nepal, and also in its relationship with India, China, and perhaps Japan, as you were saying before? What can the U.S. do to help bring about democracy, to help end the crisis in the country with the Maoists? Thank you.
Well, I think what the U.S. government does is also related to the interests of the United States. What does it consider to be its national interest in Nepal? That is for the U.S. government to decide. Now, as far as we are concerned, we have to judge from what they have been saying and what they have been doing. And the U.S. government has been pleading for a reconciliation between the king and the political parties, and then a dialogue with the Maoist. This has been basically the position of the U.S. government. While at the same time, they have been saying that democratic norms and values have to be followed in anything that the government does. And generally, these are policies that we find quite acceptable, in fact.
Do you want to be more specific than that? You've talked in sort of in terms of rhetorical statements almost. Is there anything with more specificity that the international community or the United States particularly might do to further those ends, which indeed I expect all of us would accept?
Well, I think we have neighbors, India, and you have the best of relationship with India. And India is your new strategic partner. I understand. That's what we read. So you must have a lot of influence in India. So you can work on them to make sure that the Indian policies also move in a direction that provides stability in the country.
India policy does not promote stability at this point?
I'm not saying that it encourages those policies that provide stability in Nepal.
Thank you. This gentleman here. If you can introduce yourself,
the
please.
problem we are facing is that how to overcome the impasse in Nepal. We have heard a lot of reasons and views. So my position is that
we don't know who you. Not all of us know who you are. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, we are still talking under the illusion.
There was an introduction. Introduction.
Is it working?
No, introduction. Who you are? Introduction. Introduce.
That's all right. That's all right.
You want my introduction? Well, I'm from Nepal.
We knew that.
I'm 100% Nepali, and I'm at Tribhuvan University. I work over there as an academic, and I'm here on the invitation of East West Center.
Good.
Right?
Thank you.
And my name is Dhruva Kumar. Well, what I'm telling and just suggesting is that we are still talking under the illusion that we have a constitutional monarchy in Nepal, which is not true. Right? We got to recognize that monarchy in Nepal has defied the constitutional norms, and if he still claims that he is constitutional monarchy, the problem with him is that the problem with the monarchy in Nepal is that if any sort of monarchy is a constitutional monarchy, that sort of monarchy will not have a power to execute a coup. Constitutional monarchy, by its meaning, fundamental meaning, is a tutelar head of the state only. So, if we are clear about this position, probably we'll try to make up some suggestions in order to overcome the political impasse we are facing in Nepal today. And one thing is that, very simple equation is that the monarchy should revert back to constitutional form. And he should, in a way, tell the people of Nepal that he has made a mistake. And now, since last 3 years, just because of that mistake, the country is suffering. And the situation of Nepal is deteriorating day by day. And probably it will become a failed state tomorrow, when there will be nobody to sustain the position of Nepal itself. And Nepal is a territorially very secure country just because it still has international recognition. And the Nepali flag flies at the United Nations building. That is why Nepal is a sovereign country. But within the Nepal, within the territory of Nepal, the sovereignty of monarchy has been contested now. And you might remember the 1990 constitution has transformed the sovereignty, the concept of sovereignty from monarchy to the people. And by staging the coup, the monarchy has grabbed the sovereignty again. That is why what I am telling you that it has to recognize it is not a constitutional monarchy, and monarchy must admit that.
Okay.
Another thing,
Excuse me, sir. Now, I need to be fair, and other people have had their hands.
I'm going out.
Sir, let me, sir, to be fair.
Next thing,
sir,
what I would like to do that.
Sir, to be fair.
Win the confidence of the people.
Sir, I understand you have something important to say, but to be fair, we have to let others as well. Thank you. Back in the back. Colonel Dada.
Colonel Datta, Foreign Policy Association. I reckon, and I think I am correct, that the majority population is Hindus. They are Hindus. You can categorize them whether Hill, Tarai, or elite, but majority is Hindus, and they are the most literate. 45% literacy as per your book. And how do you hold them as a minority group? I mean, this is not understandable. I would like to be clear on it. How is 80% of Hindus are a minority group, and the most literate ones are responsible for the total exclusion of Nepalese polity?
Is that question directed to anyone, Colonel Dada?
Yes, sir. Mr. Lauti.
In Nepal, the primary conflict between different groups of people is not based on Hinduism alone in terms of religion. It's more based on ethnicity, caste, and so forth. So, what I call the caste Hill Hindu elite they form around 30% of the population. They are the largest ethnic group, the plural group. And in Nepal, for instance, there is conflict between the Dalit and the high caste Hindus. There is conflict between indigenous people and high caste groups. There is conflict between Madhesi high caste group and Hill high caste group. So the major analytical tool useful to study this conflict between different groups is more based on ethnicity and caste. So that is why, in terms of ethnicity and caste, there is no single majority group, but there is a plurality group. And the interesting issue in Nepal is that plural group, which is not a majority, is dominating the collective majority groups. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think this is a very important point, because I would also like to stress this point here. Is in Nepal, in our country, what's happening is a minority. We're a nation of minorities. There's no one group or caste or class that's a majority. A minority, it forms the ruling elite, and it has an overwhelming majority in politics, in administration, in army's leadership, in business, everywhere. And so it has, in that sense, an overwhelming control over other minorities who collectively form the majority. So this is the crux of the
complex
issue.
If it were easy, we wouldn't be here.
I should also add that this whole category of Hindu is hotly contested in Nepal at present. There are many of these minority groups that are, of the indigenous minorities, would say, and low caste, who are converting to other religions precisely as a way of making a political statement against the high caste Hindu elite, and also they see this as appropriating their own culture, traditions, and identity. So many groups of gurungs are converting to Buddhism. We have many low caste Hindus who are converting to Christianity. We have boycotts against the major Hindu holiday of the year on Dasai. So this and this whole idea of Nepal as being a nation of Hindus is precisely what the ethnic political movement questions and, in fact, seeks to challenge and change.
So, yes, ma'am.
Christine McCauley with the National Democratic Institute. And my question is directed toward Dr. Lohani. Dr. Lohani, you mentioned frequently about the need for convergence between the political parties and the king, and also the need for political parties to temper their shrill dialogue against the king. But from the political party perspective, you hear about how the king has continuously refused to engage with the parties, and kind of reinforced by the announcement of upcoming elections without consulting with the political parties. So I'm wondering how you see this convergence taking place. Right. How can that be brought about both within Nepal and, going back to the question of the international community, also the role of the international community in helping promote that convergence?
Mind you, I'm not saying that what the king has done is the correct thing. I have stated very clearly that the king and the political parties, the king should seek for a new governance format in consultation with the political parties, defining in the process a new program of action for the transformation of the Nepalese society. And with that consensus, they should go and negotiate with the Maoists. So I'm not saying that what the king has done or what the kind of action that he's taking now is correct. In fact, I've said that he should relinquish his direct rule, because, as I agree with Dhruvaji, the way the king is moving now, he is not a constitutional king at the moment. The contradiction there between a constitutional king and the head of the cabinet, it's becoming serious. So what the king should do is to revert to his constitutional status and form a new governance format with the political parties based on a certain set of core transformational programs. That's what I would suggest. That's what we have been suggesting.
If I may push you a little bit on that, and the other two panelists are welcome to join in as well.
Without hat.
I've heard several times now people say the king should do this. At least some of us are skeptical that the king will do this. So if the prescription for addressing Nepal's ills is largely based on the hope that the king should do what some people think is the right thing to do, he apparently doesn't think it's the right thing to do. That, at the end of the day, does not lead me with a great deal of optimism that Nepal will get beyond its current crisis. I don't know whether there's a response to this or not. I guess maybe I'm just articulating concerns I have about the level of the analysis as to what can be done to move beyond the crisis. I don't know whether anyone would care to respond to that. Yes.
I think pressure can be created to the king in two ways. One, the international community can pressure him in terms of military aid and in terms of other things. But that may not be the most workable thing. The second issue I argue is perhaps there should be more political mobilization within Nepal that could create pressure on the king. At present, there is a movement going, there's a 7-party political movement against the king. However, the people's participation is not that high. So the challenge is to how to increase the people's participation. One of the reasons people's participation is not high is many of these political parties were discredited because of misrule and all that. So what can be done is perhaps reform the political parties and send a message that if they come back to power, they will not repeat the same mistakes that they did earlier. Perhaps that could lead to some hope among the people, and perhaps that could lead to change, more participation and so forth. My sense is, if you look at Nepal's political history, if there is big mobilization in Kathmandu and other areas, the rulers have been very responsive. Once they feel that things can go out of hand, they have given up. They have, given up their active power and so forth. So one possibility, as I see it, is to reform the political parties. The political parties should convince the people that in certain ways, through certain mechanisms, even if they commit power, even if they abuse power, they will be prosecuted and those kind of things, so that trust in them builds up and more participation could. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who has not asked a question? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Anup Pahare.
Wait till we get a microphone to you.
Thank you very much. I have one question for each of you. To Susan Hang, and my question is, do you think it is important to make the distinction, as you did, but very briefly, between the ethnic activists that have congregated with education in urban centers in Nepal and have created an enclave to raise and voice ethnic issues, and their rural clientele with who they may or may not have organic links? To what extent does this ethnic activism exist in Nepal as a relatively isolated from its rural base, and to what extent are ethnic activists in Nepal aware of that tenuous ties that they have, that they may or may not represent the issues that ethnic groups actually feel, but that they articulate it in new and modern ethnic nationalism language? And to what extent are they trying to reach back and actually make those connections? And when they are doing that, are they forced to retool and retailor their message? So talk about the complexities there, because the sense I got from you was that it's a monolithic thing. It's all the ethnic nationals have all got together and they're all speaking with one voice against A, B, C, D, and all the ducks are lined up. To my mind, the things in the ground are far more complex. Even on the issue of relationship to Hinduism, the Muggars have one set of relationship to Hinduism, the Gurungs have one. So I want you to deconstruct that for us, rather than give us a very monolithic picture, if you would. My question to...
Very briefly, please.
Yeah, my question to Mr. Lawati is, at a conference that you and I both attended in Nepal, an English anthropologist by the name of David Gellner proposed that we should actually, in Nepal, not begin to pursue ethnic purity, but actually all accept that we are all hybrids in Nepal, having existed in Nepal in the hills for so long that there was a great deal of intermarriage, and not only blood ties, but interpenetration of cultures, so that perhaps the new saving grace for Nepal would be to accept the hybridity issue, starting with the king. He was bold enough in Kathmandu to say that the king has Magar blood and he should admit it. So what about the issue of hybridity, and how much mileage can that hold for creating a new Nepal? How much of that should be part of the language of recreating Nepal, rather than talking about purity? And my question to Dr. Lohani,
even more briefly, please,
is what role do you see the civil society is playing in Nepal at the moment versus the political parties? Because I saw here, when Professor Hadachu and Professor Dhruv Kumar, I think they very much have one foot on both sides, political parties as well as civil society. Is civil society going to be an aid or a hindrance in the coming days, if and when political settlement and renegotiations have to take place?
Thank you. We'll start with you.
Okay, well, thank you, Anup, for your question. This is actually the area that I've worked on the most. First of all, the question of whether this is just an urban elite movement. In fact, there is strong grassroots support for ethnic politics in some parts of the country. Some organizations have been successful at mobilizing support there. In particular, one ethnic political party that I studied, the Mongol National Organization, had strong support in Ilam and Japa. Okay. Second, you're absolutely right that I was presenting a simplified picture of this movement as being overly unified. And while I do think there are certain commonalities that everyone agrees on, that there certainly is a lot of contention, even within Gurung organizations, right? There are hundreds of Gurung organizations right now, and efforts to bring them into a single umbrella organization have been very contentious. And partially this is because these ethnic groups are in some way constructions, right? They're not monolithic things. There's a lot of variation within. What does it mean to be Gurung? Who can claim to be Gurung? Right? I can talk about this a lot more, but in the interest of time, I can just refer you to some articles that I've written about, for example, the debates over the Dasai boycotts. Even within one village, the Gurung population was not completely together on how Dasai boycotts should be carried out, what they meant for different people. Okay, thank you.
I'll address all the 3 points. One, the ethnic groups and so forth are very diverse in themselves, but they hold a common perception that they face exploitation and discrimination. That is the commonality. Second, the hybridity Gelna talked about. Ethnic groups want diversity and multiculturalism, but based on equality, not on hierarchy, certain groups being on the higher level, other groups being in the lower level. So that is the difference. Do you accept a hybridity or diversity of the feudal days when there were birthright lords and other peasants? Or do you recognize hybridity and diversity based on equality between groups so that members of the different groups become equal? And third part, in terms of the civil society, in Nepal, right now there is a big movement going of the civil society against the king's move and so forth. Again, in this sector, my suggestion is the civil society that is active in Nepal is more partisan than political parties, more radical than political parties. They urge the political parties to carry the flag of Republican. That is, not wrong, that is their right. They should do that. But my argument is, if the civil society only demands for democracy, then perhaps there will be more increased participation in the civil society movement. Because in Nepal, there are certain sections of the middle, in Kathmandu and so forth, sectors of the society which want democracy, but perhaps some sort of constitutional monarchy also. So if the movement, the civil society movement wants to be more effective, more inclusive and so forth, so if they only focus on democracy, perhaps that could be a more stronger movement.
Dr. Lohani, the last word is yours.
Yeah. Last word? All right.
We have to vacate the room.
Okay, yeah, I know. We have to leave the room. I will also concentrate on the civil society thing. I think, the civil society is a link between the state and has to act as the link between the state and the people, and at times mediate the conflict and propose solutions. And as Mahendra said, they are at times highly politicized, and at times it is difficult to find out where academics leave and politics begins. The boundary lines at times becomes very blurred. And I've requested my friends also, look, we must raise the issue, but at least raise it in a way so that you give a sense of not being the spokesman of a political party. There are many political, and think of a constructive solution. In fact, and when we say solution, it is not just in one area. In fact, we can talk of democracy, but we can also talk. When we talk of democracy, we can also talk of the injustices, inequalities, distortions that are in our society, and that's also a responsibility of civil society to raise this issue. I don't see those things happening, but more on the radical lines, more on the lines of pushing one particular theme at the cost of another. I think a balance is needed, and if a balance is needed, they will have more support from the general people, because ultimately, average people, they would like to see balance, not extremism.
Thank you.
I would appreciate if you give just a minute.
Sir, I will give you 30 seconds, but that's all I can give you.
30 seconds is also fine. About what scenario, what's going here, and Laoti shows what would happen in institutional vacuum, power vacuum. But my point is, once the whole world, all countries have monarchy. But historically established, proven fact is that not necessarily military support, survive and help the continuity of monarchy. Because if the days the Republican come closer, then the monarchy's capabilities in terms of both psychological and physical to be more involved in more violent will be more weakened. So I don't think that military backup, whether it's 100 million or 200 million, it doesn't make matters. Once the Republican sentiment come up from the people.
Thank you. I'm going to do something that I almost never do, and that is step down from my position as moderator to make a political observation. I don't know whether we have any friends here from the embassy, but I cannot resist saying that a number of us have noticed frequent news stories in recent weeks about crackdown on the press, arrests of journalists, and I would simply urge you to be aware of the fact that if you are in fact are interested in winning support, winning friends in the United States, I cannot think of a single action that is more counterproductive to your own interests than cracking down on the media. So if, as I say, there is anyone from the embassy here, I would be delighted if you would convey that message as thoughts of a single observer back to your ambassador and your government. Now, if you'll join me in expressing a round of applause for all three of our very good panelists. We appreciate your being here, in addition to our other guests. You have many friends in this country. We are frequently at a loss as to how we can be good friends to you. That's why it's important that we continue these types of discussion. Thanks to you. Thanks to all of our friends for being here. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you very much for hosting this. This is
my pleasure.
Great.
It's certainly my pleasure.
Great.
I just want one thing to say you.
Well, my pleasure. Maybe not do as much.
I did have a full right
And you denied that well, I cannot India is 80% Hindu. They don't deny that, but they're different. And that's not being more than not being Hindu.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Going out to the embassy. So it's glad.